Thom Hartmann here on the best of the rest of economic and labor news. You need to know this. The expectation for many Americans has always been that one generation will do better than those who came before them. But that may not be the case when it comes to millennials. According to a new report from Scott Stringer, the comptroller of New York City, millennials in the Big Apple make about 20% less than the previous generation. And that statistic is the same or worse in many other parts of our country. For all the hipster jokes and stereotypes we hear about millennials, people born between the early 80s and mid-90s have been stuck in low-wage jobs since the recession, and they may never be able to come close to or to close that 20% income gap between themselves and their older colleagues. Even those young people who managed to find a job in their chosen profession during the economic downturn were paid a lower starting salary than their predecessors, and their wages have pretty much remained stagnant since that time. Many other millennials weren't fortunate enough to find a job in their chosen industry, despite that expensive degree that was supposed to bring them a better future. In an interview with the Guardian newspaper, Mr. Stringer said, quote, "This generation is at a crossroads. They worked hard, got an education, and then faced roadblocks to getting a good paying job," end quote. He added, quote, "It's time for us to pay attention to the largest generation in New York City and start to break down those barriers," end quote. And New York City isn't the only place where those barriers need to come down. People who worked hard and went to college should be able to earn a living wage, and they shouldn't be faced with a lifetime of struggling more than the previous generation. Millennials are now the largest age group in our population, and we must do more to ensure that they are not simply a generation lost. North Carolina lawmakers may be fine with anti-LGBT legislation, but the people in that state have made it clear that they are not okay with discrimination. Last week, more than 150,000 signatures were delivered to Governor Pat McCrory's office demanding the repeal of House Bill 2. That's the anti-LGBT legislation that has been nicknamed the bathroom bill and has caused hundreds of large businesses to pull out of North Carolina. Ivy Hill, the LGBT rights toolkit coordinator for the Campaign for Southern Equality, said, quote, "HB 2 is a blatant, unconstitutional attack on the transgender community in North Carolina, and we call for its immediate repeal. Citizens and advocacy groups will keep fighting for equality in North Carolina and every state, and won't stop until this discrimination comes to an end." Thanks to the FCC, 2/3 of our nation's high-speed internet subscribers may soon be under the control of just two companies. According to a recent article over at commondreams.org, that agency has approved Charter Communications' $90 billion takeover of two other cable providers, Time Warner and Bright House Networks. Despite the fact that more than 300,000 public comments were submitted regarding the deal, FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler circulated an approval order after Charter agreed to a set of so-called consumer-friendly conditions. As if we haven't heard those promises before. Craig Aaron, the president and CEO of Free Press, said, quote, "Thanks to this merger, both Charter and Comcast now have unprecedented control over our cable and internet connections. And that is pretty much everything that the FCC was supposed to protect us against. We shouldn't be increasing the size of monopolies. We should be breaking them up. And this cable merger should have been blocked." The Obama administration is standing up to corporate golden parachutes. According to a recent article over at the District Sentinel, multiple agencies are working together to make it harder for corporate executives to take huge payouts after making risky business deals. The measure is part of the Dodd-Frank Act, and it will make it harder for CEOs to profit off of short-term decisions while damning their companies and the rest of us to a bad deal in the long run. Not only would the measure ban incentive-based payments that encourage risky decisions, it would allow companies to claw back bonuses paid to CEOs who are later found to have taken inappropriate risk. As Sam Knight over at the Sentinel explained, quote, "The subprime mortgage bubble was fueled last decade in part by annual bonuses that encourage volume of business over anything else," end quote. These rules will be open to public comment until mid-July, but we should all weigh in over at the National Credit Union Administration website. And finally, while state lawmakers continue to discriminate against transgender people, colleges are welcoming students regardless of their gender identity. According to a recent article over at the Think Progress blog, trans students will now have better options when they fill out a college application. In the past, those applications have required students to answer a question about their sex without factoring in their gender identity. Those applications didn't leave room for the millions of college students who don't identify with the gender of their birth. The new Universal College Application and Common Application, which are standardized forms used by most colleges and universities, will both be more inclusive to trans students. Rather than simply asking college kids for their sex, the applications will allow students to answer about their gender identity and includes options like self-identity. And these application changes are in addition to many Greek organizations welcoming trans students, many universities issuing guidelines to respect gender identity, and more gender-neutral bathrooms and housing options on campus. Slowly but surely, the world is recognizing that there's nothing wrong with embracing a spectrum of gender identity, and that's a great thing for everyone. And that's the way it is for the week of May 2nd, 2016. I'm Thom Hartmann on Economic and Labor News.